And then there'll be this kind of, like you were talking about earlier, Adam, this kind of moralizing of like, oh, I feel like I'm keeping it because I bought it. I feel like I should. I bought it for a reason. I feel like I should finish it, And then in Marie Kondo's book, she's like, no, you got exactly what you needed from that book, which is that you learned that you don't care about that book.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 417 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm wearing pink today.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is May 25th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, where we have a new donation with a note, with a message from Lex Zapp, who says, here is some moolah, maybe for a future Shenanicon. Ooh. The 2019 one was the best game dev conference my brother and I have ever been to. So,
we have been known to throw down in our day. However, our day was a while ago.
2019.
Yep.
Long in the teeth. Wait, that's a horrifying saying now that I've said that out loud.
Long in the tooth?
The reason you get long in the tooth is because your gums recede as you get older. So your teeth get real fucking long,
Scary.
Oh.
And I guess if you wait long enough and you're
because
just a skull, then like your teeth
are real long teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you're real old.
Yeah.
Totally.
If you're just a skull. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Shenanicon was fun. Like it was fun to do all of it. We had like our level head competitions and
that was fucking
we did like live podcasts, went out to dinner with a lot of the people who were there. Mm-hmm. It was a fun get together. It was a lot of work though.
It was.
Yep.
It was a lot of work to put those things together. Yeah, and actually like we were trying to figure out how to make that more sustainable and blah, blah, blah after 2019. And then COVID happened. We're like, oh, never mind.
Yes.
And now Sam's in Connecticut. So we don't even have a venue anymore because we had an office. Yeah, the whole thing, it was feasible because of a variety of, circumstances at the time. But,
who knows?
Maybe
might be the only one. Might be left.
Yeah.
There were two.
Maybe if
2018,
Crash Dance 2 becomes a global phenomenon, No, probably not. Probably still not doing it.
Probably still
again. Not. But it's a good thought. It's a good thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I think today we're just going to get into questions. As we mentioned last week, we have some news coming up, but we're sitting tight on talking about most studio things on the podcast.
Well, I will reveal that I saw a fox outside my office window yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. I don't know what time it is. And it was shocking and amazing.
Adult fox or baby fox?
Adult fox. Also, about an hour before that, family of turkeys. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why there's a parade of animals through my backyard, but I'm very into it and keep my eyes peeled.
Yeah. Was the fox going in the same path as the turkeys?
It was. In fact,
it might have been in pursuit.
Yeah.
You might have seen a snack go by, followed by a snack eater.
I counted 6 turkey babies. So if there are fewer turkey babies next time, we will know what happened.
Yeah, or one of them's just off at a sleepover at a friend's place.
Yeah, I think turkeys do that. They're very social animals here.
They do that. They always go to each other's houses to play Nintendo 64.
Yep. It's those turkeys.
It's part of turkey culture, All right, so let's get into questions. These questions come from podcast.bscotch.net, and the highest upvoted question for today comes from Challosis, who says, I have 5,000 ideas for personal projects, and I never know which one to pursue. Do you have tons of ideas? How do you all decide which to actually build?
The first answer is yes.
Tons of ideas.
Also, having ADHD brain means you're just an idea factory. Whether you want to have ideas or not, whether you're trying to sleep or not, it's just infinite.
It's like being plagued by a swarm of bees.
Yeah.
Well, and the other
which isn't to say they're good ideas. Like just like any pool of ideas, most of them are bad, right? But they just keep on coming, and there's no stopping them. And there are a whole bunch in there that over time have accumulated that I'm like, oh, it would be cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be cool.
It would be cool, but it would also be. I think part of the problem is experience.
Yes.
Where the more things you've built, and the bigger things you've made, the more you realize what seems like a pretty like cool weekend project idea is actually like a 6-month, 5-person seed funding level kind of a project. So that it does kind of help in a weird way. Like it helps kind of squash the like, oh man, which one do I do? Because the answer nowadays is like none of them. I'm taking a nap.
Yep.
Like this is too much.
My new idea is napping or doing some yoga. That's my
That's
pretty
next
good one.
idea.
Yeah, I
admittedly,
pursue stuff here and there. And I think a lot of this, the things that turn into the projects I'm working on in the studio, like start as side projects where I'm like, I wonder how this works, or it would be cool if, or let me go just like learn about, this thing. Right. But that is still a process of like choosing the things that both sound interesting enough that I'm actually going to work on them. Right. Which I've gotten better at over time. But also identifying those things that feel like they could actually be interesting enough once I like answer some initial questions and like get a prototype done or whatever, that it might be worth pursuing. Right. So the kind of questions that I'm answering when it's like, what do I pursue is basically, what am I likely to keep working on is actually the most important thing. Right. Because I've started a million projects in my youth in particular, right, that like lasted a weekend, right, or lasted as long as I could sit down and write notes about it, like, ooh, what if I did? And I start like jotting down the notes, and then that was the last I ever even thought about it, right? So I think, in my elder millennial age, I've kind of figured out how to differentiate. But again, really, it's just I think the understanding that the core mechanism by which projects are actually done, right, is just my own interest, right, and my ability to maintain it. And so I've learned to get better at identifying those things that I'll actually be able to stay on.
Sustain interest.
Well, I want to kind of, because to me actually, because the second part of the question is, how do you decide which one to actually build? I don't know if I've ever actually decided to do something, period, like that I ended up following through on, because some things are just kind of like inherently.
Some things you got to do now.
They just kind of hook me in and grab me by the face, and I'm like, I'm doing this now. Like this is super interesting and engaging, and I didn't sit back and be like, what should I do? And then like pick amongst my ideas. It's just at some point one of them became compelling enough that I couldn't not do it. You know what I mean?
Well, so maybe that's the ticket, because I think the strategy I advocate for myself is actually just to do a very shallow engagement with any one of these ideas and see if it's sort of like you're lifting the lid, and you see if like there's a cool chorus or maybe a screaming basket of devils come out of this thing, or is it just like is it boring? Like if you just peek into this project a little bit, you start digging into it, does it grab you by the face and make you go or not? I think the challenge is basically recognizing, I think I used to beat myself up a lot about not pursuing or not like really, in a disciplined way, like pursuing these projects. And then, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, kind of slowly realized that like having the ideas and sharpening your ability to just have those ideas and assess them is its own little game and its own little hobby of a sort. And then the second one is recognizing that if you take just a very small amount of time to do some of those assessments for those 5,000 ideas, there's going to be like it's like any given day of the week. It's like there's 3 or 4 things that you're like, that would probably be the coolest, or that'd be interesting. And instead of leaving it there and letting it just float in the ether forever, you sort of go in with a machete, and it's like, okay, you're either going to pass this test and be actually of interest to me, and we're going to go away together, or you're dying. It's time to be murdered because I'm tired of having 5,000 ideas. And then you look at it, you assess it, have some chats, do some Googling and whatever else for like 15 minutes. And oftentimes by the time it's over, you're like, honestly, never mind. This is not very good.
Yeah.
But I think also the moralizing that you're talking about of being like, oh, I started this project or didn't finish it, therefore I'm a bad person.
Stick with it. Yeah.
Or I started it, therefore I should stick with it, or else I'm a bad person, right? Like I think those are the things that make it impossible to actually pursue stuff, because you end up becoming so worried about the future of the thing, like whether you're going to finish it. And then once you've started, then now you start to feel like too, like you can't go pursue something else because you started this other thing. And even though that's less interesting now, you need to keep on working on that, because otherwise you're a bad person. Right.
Yep.
It's, if you can work on removing the moralization of that stuff, that's actually what allows you to pursue stuff in a more free way, because it just doesn't matter, you know, like, cause I have a bunch of side projects that I just like every once in a while I'm like, oh, I should work on this again. It would be fun. Right. And that's now the end of the thought process, instead of like, oh, I haven't worked on this for a long time. Right.
Yeah. And maybe you start working on it and you're like, wow, this isn't fun after all. Never mind.
And actually that's most of the times, like on my evenings and weekends, when I just like pick something up that I, you know, left in the dust on the side of the road. And I'm like, oh, I want to push this forward a little bit. And I start to like work on it, and then like, you know, update all of my tech and like reorient myself to the project and kind of figure out what's going on. Then at some point I'm like, nah, never mind. Right. And then that's just it.
I think there's an interesting thing here, which is like, so in my art classes and stuff, there was this, one of the teachers was talking about how people actually spend too much time finishing pieces, which I thought was fascinating, because that seemed like the opposite advice from what a bunch of other people talked about. But their general point was that finishing anything requires such a tremendous amount of work, just a tremendous amount of work, even if it's just a picture, right? Finishing it, finalizing the render or whatever else. And oftentimes, if you think about these as these potential projects or potential ideas, instead of as a thing that you need to finish to get the value out of, if you can define a little bit better what the value would be for you, where that value would be in working on the project, and then letting yourself basically stop there, such that what you end up doing is you're basically sharpening selective skills with any one of these things that you're doing. And then instead of continuing on a path with it just for the sake of finishing it, which, you know, again, doesn't have any merit in and of itself, but it only has merit if the thing you're trying to work on is finishing something. You know what I mean? Like, how do I take something from A to Z? In which case, don't build a big thing, because the whole point is just to finish a thing and like figure out how a deployment pipeline works, or, you know, whatever the project is. I think being able to define what it is you're trying to get out of the activity you're doing is what allows you to know when is both appropriate and good to stop, and if you've sort of achieved what you're trying to achieve. So you don't have to, like, I don't know, you see people like rendering in art all the time when they don't have enough, there's not enough going on their fundamentals to be worth rendering. It's like, that is,
and it can include like your motivation for why you're doing something is because you think it'll be fun, right? Or because you think it'll be interesting, right?
Or you just enjoy it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, or you just enjoy it. And I think that's where I've ended up, is I just love programming, and I love learning about how tech works, and like learning new ideas about how to model stuff in the real world and the digital space. You know, like I just really like that stuff. And so I've gotten to it used to be though that I felt like there had to be like, I needed to go learn this new thing because it was likely to be important. And if I didn't learn it, it was going to be a problem. Right.
Right.
And at this point now I just learn stuff because I think it's interesting. Right. And the moment I get bored, I just stop doing that thing. Right. And when I'm doing my side projects, like it's like my personal website I rebuilt last year. And it was basically because I was like, I think it would be fun to take all the stuff I've learned about web dev and, you know, all the stuff and like just apply it to something else. But mostly it was because there was this new framework that sounded like it would be so much fun to use. And I wanted a reason to use it. And I was like, okay, well, my personal website is simple. It's like an about page plus like, here's some blog posts, right? So like as simple as it could be, let me just go like play with this, right? And it literally took like, I don't know, 3 months or something of like poking it for a couple hours a week, right? Just to the point where I'd be like, oh, I'm not having fun anymore. And I would stop, right? And so it took like 3 months or something to build what in the end is a tiny, simple website that actually like was collectively, actually a bunch of hours of work. Most of that was in like trying stuff and learning things, experimenting, right?
Researching.
Yeah, and just research. But like the real amount of work that actually went into building the website was like a few hours, right? And it took me months to get there, right? And it's because I was only doing it when it was fun. And
which was fun.
The friends made along the way. You know?
Yeah, because by the end of it, I wasn't looking back and like, oh, that took so long to do, or like, why did I waste all this time? Like, and I was using tech I didn't need to, right? Because like the tech outpaced, like in terms of like the stuff that it could do, it was like far beyond what is required for like this simple of a website. But I was like, I just want to see what it's like to use that, and that was the entire reason, right? And I had a blast. And since then, over the past now like year, I've just like completely redone my personal website like 3 different times, right? because
fun.
just for fun. Like I didn't need to. There was literally no reason to. I've put
means of exploring.
I've put out fewer new blog posts than the number of times I've completely redone the website. Because that's the part that's fun for me, and I just sort of embraced that like do it when it's fun, and then when it's not fun, don't do it, and then the whole time that's fine. Who cares? You know?
So I feel like there was a great lesson in the life-changing magic of tidying up book when she's talking about books, because people will often have like this, especially from a time when people would buy more, actual physical books, and nowadays it's more ebooks probably, but people would buy a book and then either never read it or start reading it and then be like, and then it just turns out it wasn't for them, right? And then they'll keep the book. They'll keep it on their shelf. They keep it forever, right?
And even keep reading it if they didn't like it.
Yeah, and then there'll be this kind of, like you were talking about earlier, Adam, this kind of moralizing of like, oh, I feel like I'm keeping it because I bought it. I feel like I should. I bought it for a reason. I feel like I should finish it, And then in Marie Kondo's book, she's like, no, you got exactly what you needed from that book, which is that you learned that you don't care about that book.
Yeah.
And now you can give it to somebody else. You can donate it, and maybe somebody else will get something out of it too. And even maybe what they get out of it is the same thing you got out of it, which is, this book isn't for me.
Yeah, it's the same idea that I tell people when they, like in the studio, when they discover they've gone down a path that didn't bear fruit, right? And they'll maybe spend a week or even weeks, right? Like digging into a thing and trying to like learn a new tech or trying to do something, right? And the other side of it realize, oh, this is actually either just not feasible right now, or it's a bad idea, or it has a set of outcomes that I don't like or whatever. And then feel like that was a waste of time or bad or whatever, right? But it's just the same thing again, which was the thing you got out of that was now you don't need to take that path, right? You've just explored a path. There's
no way of knowing.
Yeah, there was no way to know until you did it that was the case. And so, it feels like you're back where you were, right? After that, because now you like throw that all away, go back to whatever point you started at, right? Except that the place that you're at is never just like the static thing that it is right now. It's also all the possibilities of what you could do with it moving forward, right?
It's basically time travel. Like, how people are like, oh yeah, man, if I could go back in time knowing what I know now, right? Mm-hmm. It would be crazy.
Yeah, it's the same as right. You basically just did. Yeah, because you went forward in time and you're like, oop, never mind. And you go back to where you were.
And then you just delete everything. Right?
Yeah, but now you have the
starting over
that you.
But now you know things.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, be a time traveler.
Yeah, I can't remember if I ranted about Moby Dick on the podcast when I read that fucking book years ago now. But for some reason I picked it up and I was like, this is a classic. People are into it. Apparently it's supposed to be good. I started reading it and I was like, I hate this book. And I read a lot. So I was like, I was shocked. I was personally shocked that I just was not into it at all. And I called our stepdad, Kevin, who's an English professor, and was like, kind of expected. I basically called him. I was like, hey, I really hate this book and I can't, I feel like I need to, I feel like I need to finish it because it's like, I started reading it. It's the same fucking thing, right? Not having a good time anytime I'm reading it.
But it also feels like a personal failing if like it's a classic that is everybody says is so good and you're supposed to.
Yeah. I will point out, it's a classic from a time when there were like 9 people on Earth and 3 of them could read.
That's fair.
So like
it was a while ago.
Yeah, things have changed since then.
Mm-hmm. But I think I called Kevin thinking that the response would be like, yeah, buddy, listen, as a professor of English, you just need to buck up and read that book. Okay. There's going to be some hard times.
Oh, that was his advice?
No, that was not his advice.
Okay.
I think I called him sort of trying to get that, like, some external
motivation.
Discipline, basically. Yeah.
Right.
And instead he was like, well, fuck that book.
Okay.
Put that book down. He's like, why? You don't need to read something that you don't like reading. There's no value in necessarily in like finishing that. You're not doing this for a class. You're not doing this for anybody. It's just for you. So like, don't
stop
do something that you hate.
Well,
just because you started.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of this is like discussions we've had about like what you should do versus like actually want to do.
Soup.
Right. It's all the same stuff. Because like as Seth said, like what makes something classic, right? And the answer is mostly like the patriarchy, right? That's actually what makes the thing, right? It's just a bunch of like white dudes made some stuff a long time ago, and a bunch of other old white dudes were like, "This is really important," and then they made everybody else learn
even
it.
if it has nothing to do with particular societal structures, there's a fuckload of randomness. There's just like randomness
It's just,
in all this stuff.
Yeah, it's just like whether a game is successful or not, right?
Exactly.
It's about timing and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like classics, the whole idea is made up. Right. And that, which isn't to say there's some good stuff in there. Like that's a different question, actually. Because like a classic is the same idea as like game of the year. Right. Which is that it's the combination of something being like good according to a certain set of tastes. Right.
At that time.
And then also random chance. Right. And then also a lot of like who knows who, because the reality is that the awards are not given just because the people are like, oh, we're all in a vacuum. I've never heard of any of these entities, and I fully evaluated each one of these things, and I think this one is the best. It's, I've been hearing a lot about this one, and I know the people who are on the team, and I know they do really good work, and like that's actually what it is.
And they applied for the award.
By the
way, a lot of times you have to physically throw your name in the ring to get awards. Which is wild to think about.
But also think about like if you were trying to translate this philosophy into other domains, right? So let's say somebody's like, oh yeah, like I'm into gaming. I love video games. And then you go, oh, well, have you played the classics?
Yeah.
Because if you haven't played Pong, it's a classic. Like
Pong,
it was
OG Half-Life.
Yeah. And then you go back and you play Pong and you're like, wait, this is
I hate this.
Like, like things have changed, right? Tastes have changed, technology has changed, and so like what was it? Just because something was a classic doesn't mean.
And we're a lot less concerned about whales these days from like a killing them perspective than like back in the Moby Dick era. It's like fuck those whales, we need some oil for our lamps, right? And now it's like just so hardcore save the whales vibes that I don't know if you guys saw that orcas are now sinking boats and like
yachts.
They're like sinking yachts, and the whole world, instead of being like, oh no, we got to kill these whales, everyone's like, fuck yeah, sink those boats, whales.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Like think of how things have changed. And now you're going back and trying to read Moby Dick. Like you can't connect to that book. It's too far outside.
Different time. But I think the difference in games is for some reason very apparent, because the whole point is to be having a good time. So if you start playing Half-Life and it's just, you think the polygons are ugly and you're like, this is dumb and not my thing. It's like the point is to have it so explicitly in video gaming. The point is to have a good time, right? Whatever that exactly that means, but like it's to have a good time. And I think when it comes to some of these other things, then because there's a lot of, I guess whether it's educational stuff wrapped up in it or whatever else, then there's this idea like, if you don't finish a book, or I don't know, if you start a project and you don't finish a project, then there's all these things wrapped up in that, because it's not about in theory, it's not about having a good time. It's about something else entirely. And usually part of that is not having a good time. And like, that's what makes it worth such. It builds character, and like it does, sure, but do you have to be building character in that one dimension all the time?
Well, the thing they never actually say is whether it builds a worse or a better character,
That's true.
Just a character builds.
It just builds character. It's like, character makes you interesting, right? But does it make you interesting and bad?
Mm-hmm. Because which part of your character is this building? The shitty part or the good part?
Is it building a tolerance for putting up with bullshit? Because like on the one hand, that's useful, but on the other hand, that's how people take advantage of you, So
is that good? I don't know.
Yeah. And also nobody ever asks like, do I have enough character? I think I'm good. I don't need any more
of that. Yeah,
I'm topped up. I'm topped up on character. Don't need to build anymore. I built it all and I'm good. I'm good to go. All right, let's get into the next question, which comes from Beekie Boppaboop, who says, how do y'all keep useful self-analysis and criticism from turning into harsh or harmful self-talk?
Ooh, interesting.
Kind of an interesting other lens into what we were just talking about.
Well, this one is something I've struggled with a lot. I think I don't know if it's ADHD related, but I used to all the time, the entire time that I was drawing, have an asshole voice in my head, just the entire time. I'm not even kidding, just droning on about like, it's not very good. Not that line there. That's not a good choice. Why are you doing that? Etc. Just kind of this constant thing, which I think is what made it so hard to enjoy. As you'd expect, having someone be a dick to you the whole time you're working on something is not very fun. As far as how to escape that, I think it's similar to what we've talked about in these other domains, which is you somehow have to shift the point of what you're doing from being about achieving some end, very particular outcome, to basically being process focused and just being oriented around the process. And I know that for me is what kind of defanged the critic, because it was no longer about whether or not the output was up to par, if that makes sense. It was about, am I pursuing this in a way that is both enjoyable and then, to my understanding of how to do whatever this is, essentially like the correct order, the correct bits and bobs of this process to get this thing going. It was less output focused and more process focused. And as I slowly shifted that, then it's kind of mentally the shift has become more clear, and I can enjoy it without. I still have some days, to be honest, but for the most part,
it's always hard. I think it's about ego separation, because something that you'll always experience if you're starting something new, or if you're even if you've been doing something for quite a while but you're venturing into some really hard problems, is that there will be plenty of times where you make something and then you look at it and you're like, this isn't good. Right? Mm-hmm. But then the ego part comes in terms of like,
it's when you say that's not good and therefore neither am I, right?
Right. It's basically believing that somehow means more than it does, right? When really it's just like, you made a thing that wasn't as good as it should be or could be or you hoped it would be, which is just a fact.
Yeah,
it's all that it's just a thing that happened, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything about anything else.
Well, I mean, even when it does, like, that thing that it means doesn't have to be moralized either, right? Because like if I write, I mean, I actually just did this like this. So like I've been working on this coding project. Details don't matter. Last week I got to a point where I realized, oh shit, like it was really moving, right? And all of a sudden I was like adding features and it was like going great. And I got to this point where I was like, for the next thing I needed to do, where like the entire model that I had like come up with to like how to model everything, right, was going to like, to get it to move to this new spot was going to be horrible. I was like, oh God, like to actually make this work together is just going to be bad. And so at that point I could have said, oh God, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did. Yeah. I could have been like turned this into a moral spiral, right? But I've gotten so used to this being like basically the daily occurrence of just what
the
working.
Nature
whoops.
Yeah, this is just what working is on stuff that you don't already know how to do, right? And I think the advantage that we have is like every day we're working on stuff that we haven't done, but like every day is like a slight extension into the unknown, right? And so doing that enough, I think it's one of those like either the only reason you survive is because you learn how to separate, right? Or you learn how to separate by doing it. I'm not sure which one it is, right? But by doing that enough, and I get to the point where I just like look at it, I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work. So therefore, I need to like, here's what has to happen next. And it's purely focused on like, here's the state of things, and therefore here's what needs to come. Without any moralization at all of I did something bad. Sometimes I'm bummed that all that work went into something. I'm like, oh fuck, But that's a different thing.
That's fine.
Yeah, but that's a different thing than beating myself up about it, right? Which just for me has come from time and then from like starting in grad school in particular, and then going up through today, where I've just spent so much of my time operating in spaces that I don't fully know how to do the stuff in, right? And there was kind of no choice really but to like figure out how to separate the ego part, to the point where now it's like, and it's to the point where it really is like, it feels like for me it's a full separation where it's just things that happen are just facts. The way that things get done are just facts, right? And it's all focused on, okay, what comes next? And that's it.
Yeah, I think you kind of realize over time too that everything that you do, you're doing your best.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that might even mean like someday you might come into work and you're like, well, I'm fucked up. I'm kind of tired. I did not sleep well.
Yeah. Your best can be bad sometimes, right?
Yeah. Sometimes your best is shit.
Yeah. I think that's important. Your best is not an absolute mark. It's sort of like a.
That doesn't mean it's good.
Best, right?
Yeah. It just means it's the best that you can do.
Yeah. And oftentimes you doing your best is not good enough.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything other than, well, better luck next time.
Right?
How do I do better, tomorrow? I think it's a shift, right? It's the process focus shift. And I think part of the challenge, especially when you're trying to do something that's new, is also that you don't, especially if you don't have much guidance, you don't have words to be able to define what is the problem with the thing you're working on. And so you end up in a state where you might finish. I know this happens with people drawing, for example. If you're taking a class, like you'll finish a piece and you think you're done, right? Because you've done what you need to do, supposedly. You might get some feedback from the professor. It's like, this isn't good. Or you just look at it and you're like, this isn't good. But you don't yet have enough experience to be able to define why or what could possibly be done, right? And that's a very different feeling than knowing like, oh, my values are just fucked up, or oh, like the shape language is weird. I got a weird rhythm in here. Like knowing how to dissect a piece in the case of like art in many ways gives you insulation against essentially just like really negative confusion that's coming in, where it's like, this is wrong and I don't know what to do about it, which is a very different feeling.
That's the real hard part, honestly.
Yeah.
It's that there's a hopelessness that comes from feeling like you aren't measuring up, but you also can't see the path.
Yes.
And you can't figure out like what's the gap in between where I am
Or
and where
it
I
just
get there,
seems
trying
far
to
away.
get to, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I think the natural defense mechanism reaction people have is look away, right? It's like I made a bad thing, and like this is something that I work with my buddies in my WoW guild all the time. Is like we go through various things in this game, and there's all these logs that you can generate that then you get all kinds of like graphs and breakdowns of like what happened, you know, when we were fighting this boss or whatever. And I really have to work with people to not say things like, wow, don't look at the logs. I did terribly this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, now I'm definitely looking at it, right? because those should be the times where you inspect what happened the most. Because if you have this habit of saying like that didn't go very well, I'm gonna look away, right? I'm not gonna dig into it because it's kind of like it's embarrassing or it's you know it's painful for me to think about all the ways that I screwed it up. Then for starters, oftentimes when you actually do dig deep, it's a lot simpler than you thought.
Oh yeah.
It's not actually as big of a deal as you thought, but you can't know that because you just haven't looked at it, you know? And then the other thing that people will tend to do is when things don't go well, to avoid having to dig into it, they'll grab external explanations and they'll just point at one or two other things that are definitely beyond their control and say, oh, well, like I would have done really great if not for this one thing that happened.
Well, this is the nuanced thing with the whole, like, I'm doing my best, right? Which is like, again, like we're just talking about.
Yes, you are doing your best.
You're doing your best.
Doesn't mean it's good enough.
It doesn't mean it's good enough. And it doesn't mean also that you cannot do better.
Yeah,
You
because
always can. Yep.
your whole purpose is to make your best better,
Yes.
right? Like to move that benchmark higher and higher. And if you always do things the same way, and then if you don't get the response that you want, or if things aren't turning out the way that you want, if you refuse to look at it, if you refuse to dig into it, then your best is always going to be the same, and it will oftentimes, therefore, be not good enough.
Or if you're just relying on randomness. Like, because I used to do a lot of self-handicapping, which more or less it is this kind of like temporal best thing where you're like, well, yeah, the reason I didn't do well, swimming today was because I didn't sleep well last night. And it's not, again, that's fine. You could say that. Okay, yeah. But then you have to ask the question, why didn't you sleep well last night? Why isn't it a priority for you to sleep well? What's happening there? What's that about?
And did you not see this coming?
Yeah. Like, has this been a problem routinely? Because we're starting to get to a point where it's like, just because you did your best doesn't mean that it's not your responsibility to close the gap between your best and good enough, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the really tough pill to swallow, which is when you're doing all this defensive backflips to try to make it so it doesn't matter that what you didn't match up. You inadvertently put a lot of weight into the idea that because you tried hard in this moment, where maybe trying hard was hard because you slept like shit, your parents fighting, I don't know, whatever, broke up with someone, who cares? You put so much weight into the circumstances that you just routinely do this, then you stop looking at one layer deeper and being like, why did that throw me off so hard? Why am I not sleeping every night like I should be if I know this is important? Do I actually give a shit about swimming? Maybe I don't. Maybe I should go do something else with my time. Or maybe I should learn how to fucking go to bed, Yeah. Maybe I'm addicted to, I don't know, screens for whatever reason. I don't know. So I think
join the club.
Yeah, join the club. So I think that's the tricky bit, is recognizing that the conversation doesn't end because you said I'm doing my best. Yeah, I understand that, but
it wasn't good enough though. So
it wasn't good enough. So
well, and I think that's where the problem with the moralizing comes in, right? Because of the moral weight of all of this that people, you yourself, but also the people around you, put on all of these things, it makes it so that you basically form this like negative self-talk relationship, right? Of like this representation of like the moral weight, right? But internalizing your own, internal culture of critique, of like honest, earnest, good faith critique, and then ideally also being in a surrounding culture that has that as well, is I think like that's the key to it, because the fact is when you're doing like negative self-talk and like being mad at yourself for doing a bad job and whatever, right? That's actually you acting in bad faith against yourself, right? Because you could critique yourself in this, like using the same points, right? Like Sam said, like this didn't work out because you, like, at least in part because you're doing a bad job of like having a sleep schedule that would make it so that you could do this stuff better, whatever, right? And that doesn't have to end with, so therefore you're a bad person, right? And that's
the trick, basically.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the trick to all of this, is like trying to figure out how do you act in good faith towards one of the tricks that I heard somebody say that they do is they give their internal negative voice a name so that it becomes an other, right? And it's not part of their self. And they can tell that person to trash talk it. Yeah, exactly. Which, I don't know if that works or not, because it's been long enough since I had to like really deal with this, because however I found my way and it's all fine. But like presumably there are strategies like that out there that can try to help you move past this coupling of critique with moralization. Because however you need to get that start separating those things so that you can stop harming yourself and acting against yourself in bad faith. That's whatever you can do to get that started. Like it has to get started and then just improve over time. It's never going to be a switch you can flip. There's not going to be a secret where if only you do this, now all of a sudden it's fine, right?
It's a practice like everything else.
Yeah, it's going to be a practice.
But you also have to recognize that this practice of not being overly judgmental and attaching your ego to things in public, this is something that would be undoing a lifetime of training that comes from school.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because in school, if you make a mistake, it's permanent. Fuck you.
Here's your F. Good luck going to college in 10 years.
Yeah. Like, oh, you missed a question about electrons. Get fucked. You have an F, and now your GPA is ruined forever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you now, like 3 months later, like suddenly it makes sense. You're like, oh, I get how that works now. Like, who cares? School teaches you that if you make a single mistake, it's over, and you're an idiot, right? When really, like,
that's just not how the rest.
It's just the most insane. This most insane concept. Like grades are the most insane concept I've ever heard of. The idea of like we're going to take people to a place where the whole purpose of them going there is to learn. And then you say, okay, well, what happens if somebody it takes 2 tries to learn something? Oh, well, fuck them.
Yep.
Get them out of here, right? They're too dumb. No, it's just like everybody learns at their own pace, and people oftentimes like. I think all of us like learn through mistakes. Like you learn by trying stuff that doesn't work out, and then you're like, oh, never mind. And then you just do it again.
We talked about it a lot on the podcast too. Like so much of the stuff that we've learned, like for me anyway, it's like I'll try to do something and then discover that, oh, I don't know enough about how to approach this yet.
Can't do that.
And then I stop. And then 6 months or a year later, when it becomes relevant again, I try again. Right. And like, that's the kind of thing that if it was in school, I would have just failed. Right. But now in real life, I get to like learn how to do a million awesome things. Yeah, so disconnected.
Yeah, and it's bizarre because they're always like, well, wait till you get when they're in school, like wait till you get out into the real world. The real world is just so easy. The real world is so much fucking easier than school.
I mean, yeah, in certain ways, absolutely.
In so many ways, because you do get to make mistakes, you get to experiment, and consequences of like not knowing something and being bad at stuff, depending on, if you like suck at, structural engineering and then you build a bridge that collapses, well,
hard to recover from.
Yeah. You're going to want to make those mistakes earlier in the process and work those out before the thing gets built, but but like we all have this kind of lifetime of sort of training scars of having it like baked into our psyche that mistakes are a tragedy and will ruin you forever.
Don't let people see them.
Yeah, and that things not being good enough is like the word, because it is fine, right? Because like the line, "Oh, that's not good enough," right? Is like every time you've heard it, it's in this like intense like
hostile
kind of a way, right? When the fact is that like tons of things just aren't good enough, right? For what they're trying to accomplish most of the time, actually, right? And like sometimes that is because like someone's being actively bad in some way, right? But usually it's because like it was just the best that you could do, and the best just wasn't good enough, right? And it's that question of like, it's the question of what comes next, right? And what do you do?
Yeah, the thing I always liked least was having people, professors or whatever else who would stop there. You know, it's not good enough. Could you give me fucking any pointers? Because kind of why I'm here is to make this better.
You're like, I know it's not good enough. That's why I'm in an art class.
Yep.
I know that my art is not good enough.
I literally signed up for, well, not this actually. I signed up for what's supposed to come the next step, where you tell me what the fuck is going on. Right?
Yeah, well, and that's one of those things too, right? Like if somebody, again, this is the culture of good faith critique, right, and feedback, right? Because if that's what you get, if you get somebody kind of hostilely basically saying, you're like, well, that's not
a
good
lot of
enough,
art schools and
right?
architecture schools work like this, and it's insane.
Yeah, where it's just like if the feedback is just purely do better, like sometimes those are things that you should have done better in the first place because you really should know better, right? That is a thing that can happen, right? Especially like a lot of social things, right? But again, like
you should know better. But if you don't, you don't. Like
if you don't, you don't.
If you
right?
don't know it.
Well, the question there is like, it might make sense that somebody is like so mad at your right, about how much of a shit you're being about something that you shouldn't be being a shit about. Again, like social
I think that's a different situation to talk about, though.
Yeah, exactly. But because that's people will say that same line, right? Like it's not good enough, right? And I think it's separating these like out, where it's like there's the not good enough because you really should have known better, and it's actually a real problem that you didn't.
Yes,
right.
You do know better. You dropped the ball.
You do know better. You dropped the ball, right?
Yeah,
versus like you don't know and like can't know, right? And are supposed to be in a context where figuring out how is like the point.
The point,
right? And yes, there's of course tons of nuance with all this stuff, right? But it's all comes down to honest evaluation and figuring out how do you, like, the only way you can honestly evaluate your own stuff is also to separate the ego part of it, because you can't possibly even know if the thing that you did was good or bad if your habit is just to tell yourself you're bad at everything all the time.
Right? Or that you're good at everything all the time.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that was worse.
But again, like, it's okay to tell yourself you're bad at everything if it's true and you don't feel anything about it, because it is true. It is true. Like I'm bad at almost every single thing.
You don't need to be good at very many things. That's also
like
a fun
you
fact.
could.
Yep.
Yeah, if you came up with a list of like 1,000 things that people do, right? Whether it's like fly planes, draw pictures, jump rope. If you came up with a list of 1,000 things that people do, I am bad at probably
basically all of them.
Almost every single thing, right? Yeah, and so are you. Like everybody is, right? That's okay.
So why do you pick some of them? And I'm like, I'm bad because I'm bad at this, right?
Yeah, but because of this one thing, I'm a bad person now. Yeah, this conversation about do better makes me think of isn't that how that Falcon and the Winter Soldier show ended? Like
I don't.
It ended with the Falcon talking to some senator, and he was just like, "Senator, do better," and then he just flew off, and it's just like, what the fuck? What kind of advice is this? Could you stick around and give me some like policy pointers? Or
I don't remember the details, but was this because of it? It was actually the other situation where this guy was obviously doing bad things he shouldn't be doing.
Yeah,
because that's when
I don't know.
Because that's when that phrase makes sense, because you're basically, you're not actually giving feedback. You're basically saying, I see what you're doing.
You said shame on you.
And shame on you.
Yeah. You're saying be less of like the person that you are.
Yes.
Please. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Let's get one last quick question, which is kind of in line with the whole, schema of this episode. So, which comes from TimConceivable, who says, Sam, a long time ago, you asked me if there were any shortcuts to get better at art.
Yeah.
I never found any, but did you? Also, were there any wiznugs that you feel helped you immensely to improve in art?
So that was probably
yes.
Just to give some context here. So Tim is a local
Saint
Louisian, and he was part of the, or I guess still is part of the game dev scene here. So Sam and Seth met him in the very early days of Butterscotch shenanigans.
Yeah, he's actually a mod now in our Discord.
Yep.
But yeah, I always looked at Tim's work because it's really good. I like every time I'd see him, he just like casually kind of bang out cool pieces and stuff. We'd be sitting there. We used to do this game dev drink up thing, and he always just was making good stuff. And I was like, how? Because again, it's this whole I'm not there yet. How do I get over there? And I think part of it, as far as like, did I find any shortcuts? It's weird because so I'd asked Tim, I'd asked Hibbler, who did our paintings for box art and stuff. I'd asked a couple of these other kind of art people I knew who were clearly better than me. Like, how do you get there? And what's interesting is like everyone gives roughly the same kind of advice. And I think the problem is that like you cannot give, these are not wiznugs that you can pass to someone else. You know what I mean? Like
there's
that's
no
the problem.
secret.
There's no secret.
I think the most like if you ever read any like you can skip all self-help books ever if you just the one sentence there is no secret. That's the only thing you ever need to like fully internalize, right? There's not a trick out there that if only you knew that trick, everything would be easy and fine now, right?
Yeah. And that said, I will say that I think cultivating a learner's mindset, which is a lot of what we talked about just now and also just in general, but cultivating a learner's mindset, doing some therapy, weirdly enough, therapy, very good for getting better at, frankly, anything.
That's not weird at all. Yeah, it's just like take care of your fucking brain health.
Take care of your brain. Learn how to not be an asshole to yourself. Life will get better
and to
much
others
more quickly. Yeah. And to others. Yeah. But aside from those like actionable things, the stuff that ended up working for me is not the stuff that actually anybody told me would work for me, unfortunately, because I think each person where you're at contextually is so specific that the thing that you need, that you quote unquote need right now, is very unlikely for someone else to be able to actually like give it to you in say in one of these conversations or whatever, like a specific thing that would just like lock and key, boom, kind of get you there. And so like the book that I really like, Gesture Drawing for Animation by Walt Stanfield, that was the book to me that suddenly made my view of how to make art its own fun little creative process that I think kickstarted the whole thing. So I do recommend that book to everybody who wants to start doing. I recommend game jams, right? It's like those two things, game jams, that book, therapy. Like that seems like the sort of mix up of stuff, but also in the midst of this, we're like running a studio. We're doing game jams ourselves.
Yes. Sam, you've been doing art full time for a decade, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're looking for a secret, like that's the secret.
Just do that.
It is.
Just do art full time for a decade,
Yeah. To continue working on it. But I think again, like with a curious approach as
I agree. I agree with you that having curiosity is just actually the most important part, but
it's required.
But I don't know how you develop that if you don't already have it. Because I think a lot of how we were raised was like curiosity first, like from the moment we could like talk, our parents, but our mom in particular would just be like, how do you think that works? And just like ask us to try to explain shit. Right. Yeah. And that was like, we would try, right? So that was like that
Chat GPT, but really,
I was going to say, we made all kinds of weird answers.
Yeah, except without knowledge of all things, and then being weird about it. We just didn't even know anything either,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think how to develop that curiosity, I think, comes from a combination of like, again, defanging that critic and finding even a class or two to help you get a structured way to think about or talk about the thing that you want to be doing. Get some feedback on it.
You just got to try different approaches.
Yeah, try different approaches. I do feel like the classes helped get things going because they gave me some language that I just did not have up to that point. I think I've taken 3 or 4 at this point, and it's the sort of thing where like in retrospect, at the time, I wouldn't say there was clearly like a BC and AD sort of a division between those moments in time, like before having taken at least a class. But now I think there is, if that makes sense. Like looking back, I think it was an important moment because it was the first time where I got structured critique from someone looking specifically at my work, right? Not
only self-evaluating, basically. Or
self-evaluation. Yeah.
Well, and I remember in those classes, like they had you do all kinds of stuff that you had never done. Like all that perspective drawing work that you did.
So you're also just kind of uncomfortable the whole time, right? Like learning new stuff.
I was very tired.
Yeah. And those are the kinds of things that ended up carrying back over into what we do
Yeah.
in the studio, but it wasn't obvious at the time how that would happen. Like I still remember back when we were working on Scuffle Buddies way back when, and we were like, we're going to make this game in an isometric view.
Yep.
And that was such a struggle. And anytime you were working on an asset, you're just like, this isometric, this isometric shit. Like, I can't fucking, can we just stop? Can we not do it in this, you know? And then Crashlands 2 is all in that perspective. And I haven't heard a word about it.
No, it's relatively easy to do now. But that's the problem. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of those things where
But I remember the conversation because you were like, no, isometric is just harder. And I was like, how though? Like, what is like, how is it that like this is inherently more difficult than this other thing?
I mean, I can tell you now. This is the weird thing, right?
But also there's
Like
two answers, right? One is there's probably like an answer, right? But there's also because that isn't what you didn't know how to do it.
Exactly. Because I didn't have a skill at drawing in perspective, actually. That's the reason why it was hard for me.
So it has to be harder, yeah.
And the reason why it's harder, I think, than just drawing basically whatever the fuck you want is because it has technical constraints. Yeah, it has technical constraints. That's it. Like, it's not complicated. It's not a satisfying
representing
answer.
volumes, right?
Yeah. So you have to learn how to draw volumes. And
It's like it's the 2D to 3D transformation, right? Except you're still projecting it back onto 2D, but you just have to imagine it in 3D first, which is
yeah.
But again, like back to that idea of like, if you know that something is hard and but you are like, you're not able to deliver something, but you also can't see
Exactly.
what
Why?
you need to do, then all you have is frustration.
Well, all you have is self-blame, actually, I think in my case, which was like, I can't draw these things in isometric. And I also cannot articulate why it should be different in terms of the challenge level, but it is. And as a result, then I'm just going to opt to hate myself instead of figuring out what the problem is. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of that was my internal response, which was like, I suck.
I think that's pretty common. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's everybody's first response.
So I think that's what the class is like any other thing. I would say basically the open secrets are get structured feedback, hang out with people who are excited about and doing the same thing. So specifically so that you can both not be alone and then also learn to develop language in talking about the pieces that you're working on or the critiquing basically. And then, developing that learner's mindset. They're all kind of the same.
Yeah. I mean, if you just make a lot of stuff, like all of it's bad in retrospect. And a lot of it's bad even right when you make it, right? As you're practicing and doing stuff. And I think one of those is like, at some point, you're just like, you've made so many bad things, right? That it is now boring that you've made a bad thing. You know what I mean? Where you're just
it
like,
doesn't matter. It's not like
precious. Yeah, like that's how I feel now when I'm programming. Like if I start to struggle at something, or if I'm just like writing code, I'm like, oh, this is definitely shit, right? I'm just like, I've written so much shit code, right?
It's fine. Been here before.
Just add this into the pile.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter.
But I think there's something interesting though about saying that those three things are the secret because the prevailing advice for any of these things, whether it's game making, drawing, whatever else, programming, is to just do it. Everyone's like, do your 10,000 drawings.
Yeah, no.
And
it
I'm
needs to be
pretty
more
sure
structured than that.
Yeah, I draw way less than most people who I've talked to who are very good at art. Like I don't draw as much, just straight up.
It's still mostly for production, right? Like
it's mostly for production. It's barely like a thing I do. I actually do it for fun every so often now, which is a change. But like, I don't have projects that I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to get home and finish where I could paint this. No, like I don't do that. No interest in that. But I think what's weird about it is that those three things that I listed aren't about volume.
Yeah,
they're not about producing.
They're about approach.
Drawings, actually. They're about approach. So maybe that's the secret, which is. It has nothing to do with drawing.
Always evaluate.
That's the secret.
Yeah, it's always take a step back and practice useful, honest critique. Well, I think part of this is like because that's something that my wife has talked about is I think this was something that came from one of her therapy sessions, but what was the idea that I think her therapist just asked her at some point, like, so you say this stuff about like how you're perceiving yourself, like in these different scenarios, right? If one of your close friends, right, was like, describe the same scenario to you, would you be as hostile towards them, right, as you are to yourself? And the answer is obviously like, well, no, because that would be an insane way to behave.
Wildly inappropriate.
Yeah, if your friend was like, I tried to draw a picture and it didn't turn out very well, and then you say to your friend, yeah, well, that's because you suck.
Yeah, you're a
You
bad
should stop
person.
trying.
Right? Like, yeah, that would be insane. And so,
Wow, what a bad friend.
that's something to think about. But also, I think it also leads to this a practical approach of, it's really, really hard because this is all emotional stuff and you can't control that, right? So it's really, really hard it's easy to say, oh, just like separate your ego from your work, right? But like practically, that's not a thing you can do, right? That's a skill you develop over time.
Yeah.
And you need mechanisms to do it because you're not going to be able just to stop negative self-talk. You're not going to be able just to stop those things. And so you need ways to mitigate those and to make it so that you can practice and push that gap wider. And so, like as Sam said, getting a good therapist is probably the most powerful thing you could do towards that direction, right? And in addition to that, really practicing that with other people, right? Because you're going to give other people more benefit of the doubt, more just more gentleness, right, than you are to yourself, right?
That's
and
true.
so
It helps you then articulate it internally also.
yeah. And so, and even if stuff that you don't do out loud, right? Because like we've all been ingrained to have a habit of like, if we see something out in the world that we don't like, of being just an asshole about it, right? We're like, oh, I hate that game, or I hate this book, or, you know, whatever, right? And one of the things that's been really helpful for me over time is also just to practice whenever I have those reactions to things like that, is to be like, no, I'm being the asshole here, right? Like this is just not something that I like or whatever, but that has nothing to do with the thing, right? And trying to pull my own responses to other stuff, not to my own stuff, like back and put them into a more healthy and well-meaning kind of a space, right? I think also really helped me triangulate how to do that for myself, right? Because I think if you find yourself like participating in the sort of prevalent culture of just like hating on stuff, right? Yeah, that's going to bleed into what you're doing anyway. And I do think it's easier to for you yourself to make proactive change towards those outer facing things. And I think the end result is that that's going to come back in.
So I guess the summary then is, if you want to get better at art, you know, get a good therapist, practice breathing exercises, lawyer up, hit the gym, delete Facebook.
It's not, the secret to doing better at insert subject is not about insert subject. You know what I mean? It's just not.
It's about just being kind to yourself.
Take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, and be curious, you know?
So, yeah, I think it's a good place to leave it for the week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampo DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.